The prisoner did only one thing every day. That was to deliberately get close to the prison guard and carefully observe the keys on his waist. After returning to his cell, he would meticulously draw the outline. He could not afford the slightest deviation. Even the tiniest detail had to be redrawn dozens of times, all to replicate the shape of the key as accurately as possible. But everything was far from over. After the prison guard finished the inspection, he would light a match. Then, he would carefully examine the keyhole of the prison door. Next, he would take a piece of white paper, cautiously pressing it against the keyhole. Then, he would repeatedly rub his hand over it. This way, he obtained the outer contour of the keyhole. But how could he figure out what it looked like inside? The method was quite simple. He rolled up the paper and slowly inserted it inside. Then, he stirred it back and forth with a wooden stick. In this way, the internal contours of the keyhole were imprinted onto the paper. Finally, he compared it with the key. Although he now had a blueprint, it was far from enough to escape. He still needed to make a physical key. Obtaining materials became a major challenge. However, a man with an IQ of 150 quickly came up with a solution. That was to make the key out of wood. It was difficult to obtain metal in prison, but wood was plentiful. His companion laughed at the idea. A wooden key would break instantly. He insisted that as long as it followed the grain of the lock, it wouldn't break. Seeing how serious they were, Mark had no choice but to agree. That day, they happened to be assigned to work in the woodworking shop. The man quickly carved out a rough model of the key. Next, he only needed to take it back and refine it. To avoid being caught by the guards, he hid the materials inside a water bottle. Then, he signaled his companion to create a distraction. Seizing the moment, he quickly covered the bottle's mouth with a towel. The prison guard seemed to sense something. The next second, he ordered everyone to line up for a water bottle inspection. Due to the towel's absorbent effect, the hidden model inside was not poured out. Then, the guard shook the bottle twice. Seeing that there was indeed nothing inside, he handed it back. Just like that, the man successfully obtained the necessary materials. Next, he only needed to use a file to carve out the key's precise shape. Then, he glued the pieces together. A wooden key was finally complete. The glue was obtained by an old prisoner who had been incarcerated for 50 years, using every possible means to help him. The next step was to conduct an experiment. With anticipation, he inserted the key into the keyhole. When he heard a crisp clicking sound from inside, he knew he had succeeded. The next moment, he opened the cell door and took a deep breath of freedom. However, escaping from prison was still far from possible. He had to create every key in the prison. So, in the days that followed, whenever he got the chance, he would closely observe the keys on the guards' waists. Then, he would memorize their shapes firmly. He needed to make dozens of keys like this to have a chance at unlocking all the cell doors in the prison. Moreover, every time he made a key, he had to test it to ensure the escape plan was foolproof. Under the cover of his companions, he began testing. He always carried a file with him for on-the-spot modifications. But this time, something unexpected happened. The key accidentally got stuck in the keyhole. To make matters worse, a guard happened to be making his rounds. He tried to pick out the wooden shavings from the lock, but it was jammed too tightly. If they discovered this, the consequences would be unimaginable. His companion quickly threw him a screwdriver. He grabbed it and started desperately chiseling at the lock. Just then, the fat guard walked over. He quickly pretended to be cleaning as if nothing had happened. Fortunately, the guard was exhausted from climbing the stairs and didn't enter. Instead, he turned around and went back to rest. Seizing the opportunity, he quickly hammered the lock back into place. Only after this was done did he manage to escape disaster. But when another guard came to close the door, he found that it wouldn't shut properly. It was obvious that someone had tampered with it. However, after looking around and finding nothing unusual, he assumed the fat guard had simply left it open. To increase their chances of success, the three of them frequently practiced running. Now that the keys were ready, they needed a way to unlock the door from inside the cell. Mark came up with an idea. He suggested tying the key to a string, then pulling it from the other side to align it with the keyhole. But it was clear this method wouldn't work. There was no way to turn the key. Charlie suggested using a wooden stick instead of a string, but such a long object would be impossible to hide. The three of them discussed for a long time but couldn't think of a viable solution. That day, while working in the workshop, the man accidentally saw the old prisoner spinning a wheel in his hand. In an instant, an idea struck him. He crafted a rotating wheel out of wood. Then, he fixed the key onto it. Next, all he needed to do was extend it out the window and align it with the keyhole. But after turning it for a long time, he found that the key didn't fit. He had no choice but to retrieve it and modify it with a file. After several strenuous attempts, the man finally succeeded in unlocking the cell door from the inside. He was overjoyed, but just then, the patrolling guard approached. If he were discovered, there would be no way out. He quickly tried to pull out the key, but accidentally dropped it on the ground. Now what? Hearing the guard's footsteps getting closer, the man suddenly remembered he still had a piece of chewing gum. He quickly popped it into his mouth and chewed rapidly. Then, he stuck it onto a wooden stick. He hoped to use the gum's stickiness to retrieve the key, but in his haste while pulling it back, he accidentally dropped it again. Finally, after countless attempts, he successfully retrieved the key. The next day, he shared the good news with his companions. The two of them were equally delighted. They decided to scout the area that day and familiarize themselves with the escape route. The old prisoner also agreed to help them. Although he didn't believe the three could escape, he did it to protect the other inmates, because if they failed, everyone would suffer the consequences. That night, the man first crafted a dummy and placed it on his bed. When the guards played the daily music, he quietly unlocked the cell door. At the same time, Mark also stepped out. Then, he quickly used a homemade key to unlock the next door. To avoid making any noise, they chose to move barefoot. Soon, the two men arrived downstairs. There was an iron gate in front of them. The man quickly took out a key to try. However, he found that it was not the right one. He had no choice but to take out the next key and continue trying. In such a tense atmosphere, large beads of sweat began to form on his forehead. After several attempts, he finally found the correct key. Just as the two were about to open the door and leave, they suddenly heard the footsteps of a prison guard. He quickly locked the door again. Then, they hid inside the storage room under the staircase. However, the lock on this door was broken and could not close properly. The man had to pinch the screw tightly with his fingers to hold it in place, but the contact point was too small, making it hard for him to apply force. As the overweight guard approached the door, he could no longer hold on and had to let go. Fortunately, Mark quickly found a piece of wire. With it, he managed to pull the wooden door back into place. They dared not make a sound, fearing the guard would hear them. Once the overweight guard went upstairs, the two of them quickly seized the opportunity to slip out. Their experiment was not over yet. To ensure nothing went wrong during the real escape, this risky test was necessary. Every time they unlocked a door, they marked the corresponding key. At this moment, the guard was conducting room checks. Because of the dim lighting, he did not realize that the person lying in bed was a dummy. Once the experiment was complete, the man quickly locked the door again. Then, he hid back inside the storage room. Just at that moment, the overweight guard had finished checking all the rooms and was heading downstairs. However, as he walked, he noticed a few drops of sweat on the ground. He thought to himself that he hadn't been sweating. So whose sweat could it be? Inside the storage room, the two men trembled uncontrollably. If they were discovered, it would all be over. Fortunately, the guard glanced up at the ceiling and assumed it was just a water leak. He wiped it away and left. Only then did they finally breathe a sigh of relief. After quietly closing the wooden door, they returned to their cell. To prevent sudden inspections by the guards, the man disassembled the keys and hid them inside a toothbrush cup. Because they had stayed up late the previous night, even after the morning alarm had been ringing for half an hour, he was still asleep. A guard came over to check. At that moment, he suddenly realized he was in trouble. Facing the warden's questioning, he could not find any excuse to explain himself. All he could do was apologize repeatedly. The warden became even more suspicious and immediately ordered a search. It turned out that everyone had overslept. The portrait of Mark's son was forcibly taken away by the prison guard. No matter how much he pleaded, the guard refused to return it to him. He only had half an hour a year to see his son. If not for his child, he might have given up long ago. That was why he chose to escape. Before long, the man was called in. The captain forbade him from reading those meaningless books. Then, in anger, he smashed the cup on the table. The man was extremely nervous, but the more he feared something, the more it happened. The next second, the captain noticed the shattered pieces of a key on the ground. Seeing the man's bewildered expression, the captain grew even more suspicious. Fortunately, the the man was quick-witted and instantly came up with an excuse. He claimed it was used to hold photographs. This explanation finally dispelled the captain's doubts. After they left, he immediately covered his mouth, afraid that he might scream out of fear. He knew he had to execute the escape plan as soon as possible. Otherwise, it was only a matter of time before they found out. In the following days, he carefully memorized the keys hanging from the guards' belts whenever possible. Then, he meticulously crafted copies. The excess wood shavings were buried in the soil while tending the prison garden. At night, he and his companion conducted experiments. Just like that, 6 months passed. At last, they had crafted keys for all 15 doors. To be safe, he even made 20 for extra copies, but simply having the keys was far from enough for an escape. They still needed a map of the city to plan their escape route. He asked the prisoner in charge of taking out the trash, nicknamed Black, to get him a newspaper. A map was printed on it. In exchange, Black demanded a pack of cigarettes and a bar of soap. The next day, during mealtime, Black discreetly signaled to him. It meant the newspaper was ready. Little did they know, a prison guard had been watching everything from the sidelines. The man hurried downstairs to dispose of the trash. Sure enough, he found the newspaper inside the bin. Then, he placed the agreed-upon cigarettes and soap at the bottom of the bin. But the next day, a prison guard suddenly came to inform him that Black had been executed by hanging. "If you don't want to end up the same way, you'd better behave," the guard warned. Hearing this, the man knew he could not afford any more delays. He decided to act that very night. He invited everyone in the prison, hoping they would work together to escape. But the experienced old prisoner knew they had no chance of success. If caught, death was inevitable. He had long grown accustomed to life here and didn't want to take the risk. He explained that he only helped because they were all prisoners. The others felt the same way. The three of them had nothing more to say and had no choice but to leave separately. However, just as they returned to their cells, the prison guards suddenly conducted a surprise inspection. But once again, they found nothing. After the guards left, the man immediately unlocked his cell door. Then, he also released Mark and the other prisoner. The man wanted to invite the old prisoner to escape with them, but the old prisoner declined and urged him not to get caught. The three of them found a corner and quickly changed into the civilian clothes they had prepared in advance. Just then, the fat guard suddenly entered the storage room to retrieve something. By chance, he noticed a metal wire on the door lock. Meanwhile, on the other side, the escape team had reached the iron gate, but when they heard footsteps coming from below, they quickly and cautiously retreated. Only after the footsteps faded did they dare to head downstairs. They then hid inside the storage room, hoping to evade the guards' routine checks. Just as the man was about to secure the door lock with the metal wire, he realized it was missing. With no other choice, he had to hold it in place with his hand again. However, the fat guard was simply too overweight, making it impossible for him to move quickly. He was already gasping for breath by the time he reached the staircase. After catching his breath for a long time, he still refused to go upstairs. This put the man in a dire situation. Just as he was about to lose his grip, the old prisoner stepped in. He shouted loudly from above to distract the guards, finally luring them upstairs. Seizing the opportunity, the three of them quickly slipped out. Then, they hurriedly opened the iron gate. Once the man unlocked the next door, Charlie would close the door behind them again. This way, one person handled the unlocking while the other took care of locking the doors. Before long, they reached the electric gate. Freedom felt so close. However, as soon as they reached the workshop, a disagreement arose. Mark believed the door required a round-headed key, but the man remembered it being a flat-headed one. The two nearly got into an argument over it. Fortunately, Charlie intervened in time, suggesting they simply try both. Yet, they tried several keys in succession, but none worked. At that moment, the sound of a door opening came from a distance. The fat guard had finished his rounds and was returning. The man still hadn't found the right key. Mark, unable to watch any longer, rushed forward and pulled him aside. In the next second, he effortlessly unlocked the door. Now, only one final obstacle remained. Even better, the outer gate was already open. Stepping outside meant freedom. The three of them couldn't help but reveal joyful smiles. They embraced tightly, celebrating their victory. But unexpected events always strike suddenly. The man tried several keys but found none of them worked. With one last shred of hope, he inserted the final key. However, after turning it for a while, the lock remained unresponsive. Only then did they realize that the prison guards never carry the key for this door. What should they do now? Should they turn back the way they came? But it had taken so much effort to get here. If they didn't turn back and were caught, they would be executed. Mark knocked on the door panel and found it was hollow. Since it was wooden, it could definitely be broken through. The next second, he picked up a file and started chiseling away. This startled the other two. Such loud noise would surely attract the prison guards. But at this point, they had no choice but to take the risk. Finally, after 10 minutes, they successfully broke open the lock. Immediately, they changed into their disguises. When the door swung open, it felt as if they had been reborn. Mark was about to rush out, but the other two forcibly pulled him back. There were still patrolling guards above. They could only seize the moment when the guards turned away to sneak to the doorway. Once the other two arrived, the man followed the map's guidance and began his escape. On the way, they had to remain calm and act naturally, so as not to attract attention. Soon, they walked out of the prison's jurisdiction. Then, they hailed a taxi and headed to another city. Meanwhile, on the other side, the prison guards began waking up the inmates. But after unlocking all the cells, they noticed that there was no movement from the man's cell, assuming he had overslept again. The guard was horrified to realize an escape might have taken place. He shouted, "Sound the alarm." Seeing this, the old prisoner couldn't help but laugh. He never expected them to actually succeed, but at the same time, he regretted not choosing to go with them. The three who had regained their freedom could no longer contain their joy. They shouted out loud, "This is a true story." They were imprisoned for opposing racial discrimination. After 22 years on the run, their fugitive status was finally pardoned. It was not until Nelson Mandela was elected president of South Africa in 1994 that racial discrimination gradually disappeared.